let's just say that the government ought to get out of the marrying business, period. When the President of the United States stands up and says marriage is a sacred institution, I agree with him. So what's the government got to do about determining who can and who cannot enter into this sacred institution? Now this is where the Baptists are about to lose one of their distinctives. Because there are people who are trying to do in the American Baptist Convention what they did in the Southern Baptist Convention, and that is to destroy the autonomy of the local church. That in reality, we're not going to survive if every church in the country has to agree with Mr. Knox. It's not going to happen. What we can do is say, every church has the right to decide for itself what its beliefs and convictions should be. Therefore, we ought to adopt something like the model in Holland, or now in Germany. If you want to get married, you go down to the city hall, and you register, and it's a civil arrangement, whether you're a heterosexual couple or a homosexual couple. No distinction, no differentiation. That if you want to get married, you go down and find a church that will marry you. Will there be gay people that will find churches that will marry them? Of course they will. Will there be people who are opposed to gay marriage and say, we're not going to get anybody married in our church like that? Of course there will be. But we have got to learn to live together in this transitional period with differences of opinion and make sure that discrimination does not exist. And there should be discrimination in nothing. There should be total rights of people in everything. In the book I wrote on this recently, I pointed out that there are, according to the Department of Health, 1,012 legal rights that heterosexuals enjoy when they get married that homosexuals do not enjoy when they get married. That's not right, and young people are saying, that's not right. I'm not sure that their hearts are in the right place, but they do know that discrimination is wrong.
I do want to, we've had such a love fest. Are you ready for a little contention? Go ahead. It's time for the reality. All right. Let me give a few nuances in response to that, most of which I certainly agree with. I do want to push back a little bit, though, about the use of, well, first thing, just a correction of facts. It's actually, we found out since Prop 8 passed, not true, that the black vote was the difference in that. And unfortunately, again, our opposition used it to drive a wedge between LGBT folks who are perceived to be a white elite group, right, white economically elite group. When in fact, of course, we're every color under the rainbow, and you know, my brother and I are just as gay as anybody else. Boy, is he! And so, but anyway, that has been proven not to be true. But your point is well made that the black church has been co-opted again by political forces with money behind it. Some, many, most, in fact, I think it's safe to say. But all that's to say, the word marriage matters to me and Mike in a fundamental way. And while I could make the argument that its derivation was with the church, it now belongs to the secular society in ways that we simply can't ignore. When Mike's mama was in the hospital a year and a half ago, she had her spine completely rebuilt at Emory Hospital, if you can imagine this. They cut her 3 times every 2 weeks, 3 different times. First from sternum to anus, then from anus to mid-back, and the 3rd time from mid-back to the base of her head. And in those 3 operations, they created a titanium cage around her spine. And she went from being bent such that her head was lower than her hip to walking as straight up and down as anyone in this room today, thanks be to God. It was miraculous. But you can imagine for us as a family what that cost. We were, at least those 6 weeks and then much beyond that, on 24/7 hospital duty. And I'm a son-in-law that believes in family, and I did my duty like everybody else. And fortunately for me, I have a job that can largely be done from the computer at 3 a.m. as well as it can be from the office at 3 p.m. So I took the night shift most of the time and was often alone with Mrs. Bozeman. And when people would come in to do something for her, the medical staff, their first responsibility was to determine my relationship to the patient. And they'd say, now, how are you related to Mrs. Bozeman? And I'd say, I'm her son-in-law, which was, in our case, both legally and family true, right? And so people said, well, great, and come help me with the bedpan, come help me do these exercises, all the things that involve touching the patient in very intimate ways. We had to establish that relationship where they had a legal responsibility not to let me touch her. And in that moment, we did not need to have a conversation about the difference between civil unions and marriage. Now, we ended up having the conversation because after several weeks of being there, the nursing staff began to run out of daughters to go with the sons-in-law. Right? So they'd come to me and they'd say, now, are you married to Patty? And you know, I would put on my sweet Pollyanna smile and I'd say, no, I'm married to Mike. And they'd say, great, well then come help me with so-and-so. All except the one lady, finally, out of all that wonderful staff at Emory Hospital, there was one lady, an LPN, who went from looking me in the eye to looking out the window. And I said, rest with it. Just let it sit a minute. And she said, this weather's going to change. And I said, yes, ma'am, it is. And she had then to go home, you see, and lay in the bed and wrestle and rooch and think, now what does married mean? If this guy is doing the bedpan with me, then something about marriage is deeply useful and real in that family, whether it's two guys or a man and woman. And I hope we changed her mind along the way. But that's what's at stake. And so to give marriage away is not something I'm willing yet to do, Tony.
Let me say that Peggy and I, in our dialogue with each other, have a given principle that's important in discussions like this. We both entertain the possibility it could be wrong. And so in any dialogue, there's no point in arguing because each of us has to take what the other has said, mull it over and say, it could be wrong. And like Peggy's saying, wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, my God, what if he's right?
Tony brought that home to me, the idea that to have a dialogue, you had to be able to admit you could be wrong, to even listen to the other person with your whole mind. And that came from my good friend and Tony's Mel White, your good friend too. And that was very hard for me to get my head around at first, because I thought things like, will I be betraying my friends? If I even entertained the possibility I could be wrong. But then I realized I could not listen to Tony with my whole mind if I didn't entertain the possibility he could be right. He's still not, but I have been.
Yeah, that's very important.
And, you know, talking about Tony and me disagreeing, we started out with a whole lot of things we disagreed on, and I even had a 2-page double-spaced paper that I read before I spoke everywhere to say that he was not on the page I was on. And now there's so many, many things that we find we agree on. It's called looking for common ground. And you do that when you love somebody and you want to find ways you can agree. And I wish the church could do a better job of looking lovingly for things that they can agree on, even if they can't get to agree on the whole big piece. Every step in the right direction is just that, a step.